I was sitting on the cold bathroom tile, back against the tub, bleeding through my clothes, when my husband told me no, not eventually. Not after a conversation. Immediately. The word left his mouth before I even finished asking. I had barely gotten the sentence out. Could you please run to Walgreens and grab me pads? I'm out and I can't drive right now. And Garrett was already shaking his head with this look on his face like I had asked him something absurd, something beneath him. And he said no, just like that. Flat and unbothered and completely unaware that something between us had just cracked open that would never fully close again. I want you to stay with me through this whole story, because what happened that night was only the beginning. The real thing, the thing that changed everything, came later. And I promise you, by the time we get there, you will understand exactly why I made the decision I made. My name is Brooke Callahan. I am 29 years old. I am a licensed occupational therapist at a rehabilitation center in Phoenix, Arizona. I help people relearn how to do everyday tasks after illness or injury. I spend my days sitting with people in their most vulnerable, most human moments, and I have never once thought less of them for needing help. That is important context for everything that follows. If you are new here, please like this video before you keep watching. It literally takes 2 seconds, and I need your support more than you know. And stay until the end, because the part that finally broke me open is not the part you are expecting. Garrett and I had been married for 14 months when this happened. We had dated for 2 years before that, 3.5 years total. I had believed, with complete sincerity, that I knew this man. We had talked about children, about buying a house outside Phoenix, about what we wanted the next 20 years to look like. I had built a future in my mind that had his face in it, and I had done that based on a version of him that, as it turned out, was missing some very important information. It was a Wednesday night in February. I had been cramping since that afternoon. Bad enough that I had left work an hour early, which I almost never do. My cycles have always been heavy and painful. It is just the reality of my body, and I have managed it my whole adult life without complaint or drama. I knew what I needed. I had 1 pad left when I got home, and I used it immediately. By 9:30 that night I was out. The pain had gotten worse, and I was in no condition to drive. Garrett was on the couch. The television was on. He had eaten the dinner I had made before the cramps got bad, and he was relaxed and comfortable and completely unbothered by the world. I came out of the bathroom holding the empty package, and I told him what I needed. I kept my voice calm and normal because this should have been a normal request. A small thing, a 10-minute errand for the person who is supposed to be your partner in every hard and easy moment life hands you. He said no. I asked him why, and then he said the thing. He said, because I don't want to walk into a store and buy that. People will see me. It makes me look weak. Weak. I remember the exact quality of the silence that followed that word. I remember the way the television kept going in the background. Some sports commentary, completely indifferent to the fact that my husband had just told me that his appearance to strangers he would never see again, mattered more than my pain. I remember looking at his face and finding it completely relaxed. No guilt. No discomfort. Just a man who had stated his position and considered the matter closed. I told him he could use the self-checkout. He said that wasn't the point. I told him that nobody in that store would think anything of a husband buying pads. He said he didn't care what I thought, he wasn't doing it. And then, and this is the part I need you to really hear, he turned back to the television. Turned back to the television. I stood there for another moment. And then I went back into the bathroom and I made do. I put on dark pants and a heavy hoodie, and I drove myself to the 24-hour pharmacy 8 minutes away. I gripped the steering wheel and breathed through the cramps. And I bought 3 boxes because something told me I needed to overstock. Like my body already understood that I was going to need to take care of myself from here on out. When I got home, Garrett was still on the couch. He looked up when I walked in and said, "You went yourself?" I said yes. He said, "See, that wasn't hard." I put my bag down on the kitchen counter. I walked to the bedroom, I closed the door behind me. I lay in the dark for a long time, thinking about the word weak. Why that specific word? What it told me about the internal logic he was operating from. In his mind, there was a category of things that strong men did, and a category of things that weak men did. And buying pads for his wife in pain fell in the second column. And he had made that calculation in less than a second. No hesitation. No conflict. I thought about 14 months of marriage. 2 years of dating before that. 3.5 years of building something together. And I thought about how a person can be right next to you every day, and you can still be missing the full picture of who they are. I didn't sleep much that night, but I was very, very awake. The next morning, Garrett made coffee like it was any other Thursday. He moved around the kitchen with that easy, unhurried energy he always had in the mornings. He poured 2 cups without asking. He always made mine too, I'll give him that. And he set it on the counter near me and said good morning and asked if I was feeling better. Not, I'm sorry about last night. Not, I should have helped you. Just, are you feeling better? Present tense. Forward-looking. The previous night already filed away in whatever drawer he kept things he didn't want to examine. I said I was fine. I drank the coffee. I went to work. At the clinic, I moved through my sessions on autopilot. Not badly, I never let my personal life affect my patients. But in the spaces between appointments, I kept returning to the same place in my mind. I kept hearing the word weak. Kept seeing his face when he said it. Kept feeling the specific quality of his unbotheredness when he turned back to the television. My coworker Simone found me in the break room during lunch, sitting very still, staring at nothing, and she asked me what was going on. Simone has been an OT for 6 years, and she has the particular perceptiveness of someone who spends all day reading people's bodies for information their mouths aren't giving. She sat down across from me and waited. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. And when I was done, she asked me one question. She said, Brooke, what did you feel when he said no? Not what did you think, what did you feel? I thought about it honestly. And I said, not shocked. And that's what scares me. She nodded slowly. Like that answer meant something she had already suspected. The thing about not being shocked is that it means some part of you already knew. Not this specific incident maybe, but the shape of it. The shape of a person who, when given a small opportunity to prioritize you over his own comfort, chooses his comfort without guilt and without hesitation. Some part of me had already mapped that shape. I had just been calling it something else. That night I came home and Garrett was in a good mood. Genuinely easy and warm. The version of him that had made me fall in love in the first place. He had ordered food from the Thai place we both liked. He asked about my day. He laughed at something I said, and I sat across from him at the dinner table, thinking about how completely 2 things can be true at once. This man can be warm and funny and good company, and still be someone who left his wife on the bathroom floor because he was worried about his image. Those 2 things were both real. That was the confusing part. The following Saturday, we went to his friend Marcus's birthday dinner. A group of about 12 people at a restaurant downtown. I had met most of them before. Garrett's work friends, their wives and girlfriends. Halfway through dinner, the conversation turned to the kind of domestic logistics that couples talk about in groups. Who does what at home? Who handles which errands? And one of the wives, a woman named Petra, cheerful and direct, said something about her husband making a pharmacy run for her last month, and how he'd come home with 3 different brands because he wasn't sure which one she wanted. The table laughed warmly. Her husband shrugged like it was nothing. Because it was nothing. I watched Garrett's face during this exchange. It was perfectly neutral, but there was something underneath the neutrality. A slight stillness around his jaw. A micro-adjustment in his posture. Almost imperceptible. If I hadn't been watching closely, I would have missed it. He didn't laugh with the rest of the table. On the drive home, I mentioned Petra's story. I kept my voice casual. I said it was sweet, what her husband did, and Garrett said, every couple is different, in a tone that closed the subject like a door being shut firmly but quietly. I let it close. but I noted it. That week, I started paying attention to the pattern of when Garrett helped me versus when he didn't. And what I found was that the help was always contingent on something. He would help when it was convenient, when it cost him nothing visible, when it could be witnessed by someone whose opinion he valued. But the moment something required him to absorb even minor discomfort or inconvenience, especially anything he associated in his own internal map with vulnerability, the answer was always a version of no. It was never dramatic. It was never cruel in a loud way. It was just a consistent, quiet pattern of choosing himself. And I had been so inside the relationship, so accustomed to the warmth he gave me in the easy moments, that I had never laid the pattern out flat and looked at it directly. By the end of that week, I had also started thinking about something else, something practical and slightly uncomfortable. We had been talking about having children, not someday vaguely. Concretely, we had talked about timing. We had talked about what the first year would look like, and I sat with the pad incident in my mind, and I thought about postpartum recovery. I thought about what that first month actually looks like. The pain, the healing, the absolute physical dependence that comes with bringing a human being into the world. And I thought about the man who wouldn't drive 8 minutes because he was worried about looking weak. And for the first time since we'd started having those conversations, I felt genuinely afraid, not of having children, of who I would be having them with. I called my mom Linda on a Sunday afternoon and talked to her for 40 minutes on the back patio while Garrett was at the gym. My mom is not the kind of woman who panics. She raised 3 kids, mostly on her own after my dad left when I was 11, and she developed a specific, unshakable quality of calm that I have spent my whole adult life trying to inherit. She listens completely before she speaks, and when she speaks, she does not waste words. I told her about the pad incident. I told her about the dinner party and Garrett's face during Petra's story. I told her about the postpartum fear that had settled into me like cold water. I told her about all of it. She was quiet for a long moment after I finished. And then she said, "Brooke, how many times in the last year have you adjusted what you needed so that he wouldn't have to feel uncomfortable?" I opened my mouth to answer, and the words didn't come. She didn't push. She just waited, the way she always has, giving me space to arrive at the thing myself. The answer, when it surfaced, was more than I could easily count. I thought about the times I had felt sick and pushed through work events he wanted to attend because canceling would have inconvenienced him. I thought about the weekend trips I had abbreviated because he got restless. I thought about every conversation I had softened, every need I had minimized, every discomfort I had quietly absorbed so that the surface of our life together could stay smooth and easy and undemanding for him. I had been doing the labor of keeping this marriage comfortable, and I had been doing it so automatically, so invisibly, that I had never once named it. My mom said, before we got off the phone, "I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just asking you to be honest with yourself about what you've been accepting." I sat on the patio for a long time after we hung up. That evening, I decided to have a real conversation with Garrett. Not a fight. Not a confrontation with an agenda. Just an honest conversation about what had happened and what it had revealed. I wanted to believe, that maybe he hadn't understood the impact. That maybe if I explained it clearly, as an adult, as his wife, he would hear me. I sat down with him after dinner, and I told him I wanted to talk about what happened the Wednesday before. He immediately got that look, the measured, patient look, the one that made me feel like I was being handled before I even finished a sentence. But I kept going. I told him that what had hurt me wasn't just the refusal, it was the reasoning. The word weak. What it said about how he saw vulnerability and need, and the basic act of caring for someone, when it costs you something minor. He listened. He was quiet for a moment. And then he said, "I think you're making this into something bigger than it is." I told him I wasn't. I told him I needed him to understand that there are going to be moments in a marriage, especially if we have children, where one of us needs the other to show up even when it's inconvenient. And I needed to know he could do that. He said, "You drove yourself there just fine." Those words landed in my chest like something solid and cold. You drove yourself there just fine. He had just confirmed, without realizing it, exactly what my mother had asked me to look at. He wasn't apologizing for the refusal. He was crediting my ability to absorb it. I asked him, calmly, keeping my voice even, what he thought the first months after having a baby would look like, what he imagined his role would be. He said I would need some help at first, but that I was capable and strong, and I'd be back on my feet quickly. I asked him specifically about postpartum recovery, the physical reality of it. He said that women had been doing it forever, and that I would handle it the way I handled everything. I asked him if he thought there were things he might need to do that felt unfamiliar or uncomfortable during that time. Things that might feel outside of what he was used to. He said, I'd figure it out. And the way he said it, vague, unconcerned, already looking for a way to end the conversation, told me he had not thought about it for one single second. Not genuinely. The children conversation for him had been abstract and pleasant. A future picture, not a real calculation of what it would actually require from him in specific, physical, daily terms. I said goodnight and went to the bedroom. I lay in the dark and thought about what Hadley had said to me once about compensatory patterns in rehabilitation. She said the thing about compensation is that it works. Right up until it doesn't, the healthy tissue covers for the injured part so effectively that you don't see the problem until the healthy tissue finally gives out. I had been the healthy tissue in this marriage, and I could feel myself starting to give. I went to see my best friend Nadia the following Saturday. Nadia lives 20 minutes from me in Scottsdale, and she has known me since we were 19 years old in the same dorm hallway at Arizona State. She is one of those people who will tell you the truth without drama and without cruelty, and she has never once told me what I wanted to hear when what I needed to hear was something harder. I told her everything. From the beginning. The full picture. Not the edited version I had been telling people in pieces. She listened with her legs folded under her on the couch, holding her coffee with both hands, not interrupting. And when I was done, she said, Brooke, you already know what this is. I can see it on your face. I asked her what she saw. She said, you're not here to figure out what to do. You're here to say it out loud so it becomes real. She was right. I had already done the assessment. I had already laid the pattern flat and looked at it directly. I had already had the conversation with Garrett and watched him confirm everything I feared. I knew what I was looking at. I had known since the night I drove myself to the pharmacy with cramps, bad enough to blur my vision, and came home to find him on the couch, asking if it had been hard. What I was doing with Nadia was something different. I was practicing the truth, saying it aloud to someone who loved me so that it would stop being a private, frightening thing inside my chest and become something real and nameable that I could actually act on. I told her I was thinking about leaving. She didn't look shocked. She just said, what do you need? I told her I needed a few days to think, a few days away from the apartment, where everything had happened, where every room had the residue of the version of this marriage I had been trying to hold together with both hands. She said I could come stay with her whenever I wanted. No questions, no timeline. Whenever. I drove home with that offer sitting in my chest like a resource, like something I could reach for when the moment came. And the moment came faster than I expected. That Monday, I came home from work to find Garrett on the phone in the kitchen. He was talking to someone. I couldn't tell who, in a lowered voice, and when he heard me come in, he adjusted his posture and wrapped up the call quickly. Too quickly. And then he turned around and smiled, and asked how my day was. Normal. Completely normal on the surface, but I had been paying attention for 2 weeks now, and the too quick ending of the phone call was the kind of micro detail I had learned to hold on to. I didn't say anything. I put my bag down and changed out of my work clothes and started dinner. And while I cooked, I made a decision. Not about the phone call. I had no proof of anything, and I was not going to build a case on a hunch. The decision was bigger and simpler than that. I decided I was done waiting to feel sure. I was already sure. Had been sure since the night he turned back to the television. What I had been waiting for, without admitting it to myself, was permission. The kind of permission you give yourself When you've gathered enough evidence that no one could argue with you, enough that even the voice in your head that sounds like every person who ever told you to try harder and give more and be more patient would have to fall quiet. I had that now. After dinner, when Garrett was in the living room, I sat at the kitchen table and I called my mom. I told her I was going to leave. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Do you want me to come to Phoenix?" I told her no. I told her I needed to do this part myself. Then I sat down across from Garrett, and I told him the truth. I told him that what had happened 2 weeks ago wasn't about pads, that it was a window, a small, specific, undeniable window into the way he made calculations about what I deserved relative to his own comfort. And that window, and the conversation that followed, and every pattern I had been sitting with since, all of it had shown me something I couldn't unsee. He started with the measured patience, the "I think you're catastrophizing" tone. He said I was being dramatic. He said I was letting one incident define 3.5 years. I told him the incident hadn't defined anything. It had revealed something that was already true. He got angry then. Not loud. Garrett was never loud, but cold. He told me I was ungrateful, that he had been a good husband, that I was throwing away a marriage over something ridiculous. I told him I was going to stay with Nadia for a few days and that we should both use the time to think. He said, "If you walk out that door over this, that's on you." I picked up my bag. I had already packed it that afternoon, and I walked out the door. Nadia had the guest room made up before I even texted her that I was on my way. That's the kind of friend she is. She didn't ask for an explanation or a timeline or a plan. She opened the door when I knocked and she hugged me in the doorway for a long time. And then she made tea and we sat at her kitchen table until almost 2 a.m, just talking. Not about Garrett specifically. About me. About who I was before I had started quietly flattening myself to fit the shape of his comfort. The first morning I woke up in her guest room, I lay there for a while just noticing how I felt. I had expected sadness to be the dominant thing, and it was there. Real and heavy. The kind of grief that comes from losing not just a person, but a future you had built in your mind. A whole architecture of plans and hopes and imagined mornings. That grief was real, and I am not going to minimize it. But underneath it, steadier and more surprising, was relief. I had not realized how much energy I had been spending. Holding things together. Managing his comfort. Softening my needs into shapes that wouldn't inconvenience him. It had become so automatic that I hadn't felt the weight of it until I set it down. Setting it down felt like breathing correctly for the first time in a very long time. I spoke to Garrett twice that week. Both conversations were short and hard. He cycled through several versions of his response. First, anger, then the cold withdrawal he had always used to make me feel like the unstable one, then something that sounded almost like an apology, but kept landing as justification. He never once said the words, "I am sorry for leaving you on that bathroom floor." He never once said, "I should have gotten up and helped you." What he said, in various forms, across both conversations, was that I had overreacted. That I was building a case out of nothing. That he had been a good husband. And this was not fair. And I realized, listening to him, that this was exactly the pattern. This was the whole thing in miniature. He could not absorb accountability. The moment accountability was on the table, he reconfigured it. Until I was the problem, and he was the injured party. He had been doing it for 3.5 years, and I had been letting it work, because I had been so committed to the version of him I wanted to be true. The version who would eventually show up. Who would eventually choose me over his own comfort, without needing to be convinced. That version didn't exist. I filed for separation 3 weeks after I left. Not because I was in a hurry or because I was angry. Because I was clear. Because clarity, once you have it, is very hard to unknow. My mom came to Phoenix for a weekend and helped me find a 1-bedroom apartment in the Arcadia neighborhood, small but full of light, with a kitchen window that looks out over somebody's backyard lemon tree. I signed the lease myself. My name only. That felt important in a way I hadn't anticipated. I have been in the apartment for 2 months now. I am still a work in progress. Some nights are harder than others. The grief comes in waves, the way all grief does, and I let it. I don't push it away, or try to resolve it faster than it wants to move. I am an occupational therapist. I know better than anyone that healing is not linear, and that the goal is not to feel nothing. The goal is to build enough strength that the feeling doesn't take you all the way down. But here is what I know, clearly, on the other side of all of it. I know that the pad incident was not a small thing. It was not an overreaction to treat it as significant. A partner's willingness to absorb minor discomfort for your sake is not a small thing. It is one of the foundational things. It is the proof, in the most ordinary and unglamorous of moments, that you are someone whose pain is worth showing up for. I was worth showing up for. I just had to stop being with someone who couldn't see it before I could fully believe it myself. I think about the woman who drove herself to the pharmacy at 11 at night in pain, gripping the steering wheel, telling herself it was fine. I think about her with so much tenderness and so much sadness. She was doing her best. She was working with the information she had. She has different information now. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you. Genuinely. If any part of this felt familiar, if you've ever minimized what you needed to keep someone else comfortable, if you've ever told yourself you were being dramatic when actually you were just finally paying attention, I hope something in here landed for you the way it landed for me. Please like this video if this story moved you in any way. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below and tell me what moment hit you hardest. I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It means more than I can tell you. Take care of yourself. I mean that.